The synagogue Paul is calling the barren. Why? Because they trace their lineage according to biological birth. Now, don't be dumb and Gnostic. Does that mean that Paul's saying that biology and gender and your natural birth don't mean anything? No, of course not. This is how stupid and childish we have to deal with when we're dealing with these questions. People come back with the dumbest stuff, like oh yeah, well then gender and heritage don't matter anymore. Well, no, Paul elsewhere says that they do matter. Paul elsewhere says women have to behave like women, right? You can't take there's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, and try to twist that into something that, oh well, now there's no people groups and there's no gender anymore. Because, well, Paul said it. Paul said there's no such thing, but there's neither slave nor free, Jew nor Greek. No, elsewhere he says slaves, do not try to rebel against your masters. He says women, submit to your husband. And he talks about distinct people groups. He even talks about the Jews as a distinct people group that he still loves and cares for and hopes to convert. So, no, we mustn't adopt the childish exegesis of trying to pit Paul against Paul or Paul against the Old Testament. Because again, Paul's just using a type that makes no sense if there was no earthly Jerusalem. If there was no Abraham and Hagar, then his allegory loses all of its force. So don't listen to dum-dums and heretics that try to tell you that an allegory somehow means that there's no such thing as history. It's just simply not true. Every one of the types that are utilized in the New Testament are based in the presupposition of history. When Paul talks about Jesus being the new Adam, that presupposes that Adam was the actual historical Adam who actually brought death and corruption into the world. The comparison makes no sense if Adam didn't exist. And if Adam didn't exist, then you're back at a kind of Gnosticism where Jesus doesn't take on human nature. The incarnation presupposes the reality of Adam and creation in Genesis. Obviously, Jesus numerous times speaks of Adam and Eve as historical people. So the dum-dums who tried to explain all this as ahistorical allegories, adopting Origenism, they're too stupid to even realize the implications of how they should follow that through. Well, then that means Jesus was wrong. And by the way, when they do eventually figure out that that is where they have to go to be consistent, they end up leaving Christianity. They would rather leave it all because of being hard-headed and stupid about the Bible. That's the root of this. What does Jesus say, right? You can give the people miracles, you can give them anything you want. They're not going to, you think they're going to believe ecumenical councils? They're not going to believe in myrrh-bearing icons if they don't believe Moses and the prophets. They ask Jesus this in the Gospels. They say, do a miracle for us and we'll believe. And Jesus says, if you don't believe Moses and the prophets, you're not going to believe a miracle. For Moses and the prophets wrote about me. Did you hear me? Moses and the prophets wrote about me? How's that for continuity between the Old and the New Covenant? How could Moses and the prophets write about? Well, because it was the Spirit of Christ speaking through the prophets. That's how. It's a no-brainer. But of course, we are bathed in modernity and higher criticism, and people don't know any of this stuff. The entire book of Hebrews, which is about typology, makes absolutely no sense if the events that it's describing as types or antitypes aren't historical. It's a no-brainer. This is not that hard to figure out. It is very hard to figure out, however, when you have mistaken assumptions and presuppositions like many modernists do, such as, for example, the idea that we can't actually know any kind of historical event or what it meant to be a historical event. This is really just gobbledygook of academia that people think sounds sophisticated. It's not sophisticated. I've been through academia. I know academic speak, and it's nothing but confusion and gibberish, and it really gets nobody anywhere. And it's a perceived edifice of power because it has a lot of money behind it, right? And oh, look at that university. It's so stately, and look at all the statues that they have. They're so statuesque. They must know what they're talking about. They've got statues of British men in tight pants out front. It's Oxford. They must know what they're talking about. Well, you don't get to go here unless you're one of the special people. Oh, really? Oh, really? Well, how come all the Orthodox who go to Oxford come out of it modernists? It's ironic. So, we want to also then step back for a moment. Speaking of these covenants, now you might think with this text here, oh, see, there's only 2 covenants. This is some of the errors of the heretics of the evangelicals. They come to these dumb conclusions. Oh, so there's only 2 covenants, and everything in the Old Testament is law and bondage, and Jesus came to bring grace. Now, this is like a Lutheran reading. No, right? Remember, Luther says, I wish I could punch Moses' teeth out. Because he's so interested in the dialectical tension between law and grace. Luther wants to punch Moses in the teeth. I had a Lutheran messaging me saying, I will no longer listen to you and support you because you spoke mean against our beloved heresiarch Luther. Well, Luther is a heretic. And the fact that your buildings have Lutheran church dawning every one of them shows you that you don't follow the historic Catholic Church, the Orthodox Catholic Church, the ecumenical church. You follow a man. That's the definition of schism. I mean, it couldn't be your own. Every building tells you that you're in a schismatic heresiarch church. For all of the insights that might be there, yeah, okay. Luther said some nice things about corruption in the papacy. So what? He's going to tell you that there's no free will, and he's going to tell you that the Old Testament and Moses is set against grace in the New Testament. That's not what any of the church fathers teach. That's not what the New Testament teaches. And that's because Luther is a heretic. So let's look for a moment here at Genesis 2. And by the way, that guy said that Luther had nothing to do with the history of higher criticism. Oh, yes, he did. It's not an accident that higher criticism comes out of Germany and Lutheran tradition. I mean, have you not read Luther? And by the way, a lot of Lutherans haven't. Well, I have. I've read about 10 books from Luther. Commentaries, Bondage of the Will, on and on. Catechism. I know damn well what Luther taught. I read his commentary on Romans. I've read his commentary on Galatians, Ephesians, Peter and Jude. I've read what he says about James. I mean, it's not that hard to figure out that if you think that Moses is set against Christ, that's exactly where higher criticism comes into play. Because all the higher critics go back to the German higher critics who hated the Old Testament. This is not hard to figure out. This is a no-brainer. I'm trying to pull up. We'll get to those guys here in a little bit. We'll get to Julius Wellhausen and all that, which I brought up many times. But this Lutheran guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And, I'm not threatened. By the way, when you say you don't want to support me anyway, that doesn't hurt me. Like, you're not damaging me. I'm not worried. You're not getting me when I trigger you. So let's notice here, Genesis. This is the proto-evangelion. This is the first gospel. We've talked about it many times. In Genesis 3:15, we have the promise that the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. In the book of Revelation, in chapter 12, we're told who this is. It's Mary and her son who crushes the head of Satan. That means from Genesis to Revelation, there's continuity. It's the exact same story, and it's the exact same thing. And in fact, John in Revelation 12 is drawing directly on the proto-evangelium. And Revelation 12 tells you when Jesus began his reign. It's not in the millennial reign of the dum-dums and John Hagee. It's when he ascended. Look, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. He will bruise your head, you shall bruise his heel. The seed here is spiritual, by the way. Dum-dum, spirit. What's this dumb heresy that's serpent seed heresy? They actually think that this is talking about biology. How could you be any more stupid? Every human being who is wicked is of the seed of the devil. It doesn't have anything to do with biological birth. That's really a no-brainer. When Jesus says you are of your father the devil, he is talking about the Jewish leaders there. But in Romans 1, Paul makes it very clear that the nations who are in service to idolatry are under the devil. Paul says in Ephesians 2 that we are by natural birth sons of the devil. And we justly deserve our condemnation. So there's nothing more ridiculous than the serpent seed heresy, which is a Christian identity heresy concocted by a bunch of feds. Obviously, it's a cult. And they come up with this idea from here that this is talking about white people. White people are the seed of the woman, and the Jews are the seed of the serpent. That's not what this is talking about. Idiotic. It's not talking about white people. The woman is Mary in the church, because Mary and the church have a close relationship. Mary gave birth to the person who is the Son of God, the divine. There's only one person there, the Son of God. That's why she is the mother of God. She is Theotokos, and encapsulated in that Orthodox term of Theotokos is the entire gospel. Because if she did not give birth to the Son of God, then we are not saved. If she gave birth to a human person, then Arius and Nestorius were correct, and our religion is not true. It might as well be Jehovah's Witnesses or something. But you'll notice that Revelation 12 says a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, garland of 12 stars. This harkens back to Joseph's dream in Genesis. Patriarch Joseph, again, we see continuity. Mary represents the fulfillment of Israel. She represents the fulfillment of the church, and she represents the new Eve. All these things, these symbols can be interchanged. And dumb evangelicals and heretics, they set the symbols against one another. And they'll say something stupid like, this has nothing to do with Mary, this is only the evangelical church of the end times, or some nonsense like that. Completely retarded. No, it's obviously not talking about just the end times. It's talking about the incarnation and the resurrection. Notice, John doesn't set this at the end of time. He sets this as a symbolic spiritual image that encompasses everything back to creation, to the proto-evangelium, to the end of time. Another sign appeared in heaven. Look, this is her giving birth to Jesus. It's Mary. By extension, it's the church, but it's also Mary. Who gave birth to Jesus? It's a no-brainer. Another sign appeared, a dragon having 7 heads in heaven. Now, Seventh-day Adventist retards, they think that there's literally going to be dragons flying around in heaven. That's how stupid these people are. It's talking about all of history encompassing the spiritual warfare between good and evil, between the righteous and the wicked.